Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A pleasure to have you all here with us today. I think following those introductions, there's no doubt that we've got a phenomenal panel here this afternoon who are going to engage us on some of the critical elements which impact on the business environment. Now, let's be quite frank. Many of you represent companies which might be based in South Africa, but operate in multiple territories across the continent and maybe even further afield. And in the world of business today, I think many of us can reflect on the year 2018 and really say it was characterized by what? Market volatility, heightened political tensions, and of course, muted confidence, not only from investors, but even from shareholders and other stakeholders on the ground who engage with many large corporate entities, but yet still have a critical view on leadership, authentic leadership. So in the world of 2019, it seems as though business as usual takes place, as many of these themes that were critical in 2018 will remain for the year ahead. So as such, how is it then that executives and decision makers and implementers of strategy need to align politics and policies, translate that into the people that they employ and the leaders that also adapt the policies for their companies, and most importantly, translating that into profit for the organizations. That's exactly what we'll try to unfold with our panelists who will give us some insight from their various areas of expertise as well as disciplines. I'd like to start off with Bruce firstly, not only because you break the rules, all attention. Now I must warn you, Bruce, many people in the audience will be listening very closely to what it is that you have to say.
No pressure then.
No pressure. Bruce, let's actually pick up with where you actually sit. You sit on multiple media platforms, providing insight and, of course, opportunities for executive leaders to present their views, entrepreneurs as well to share their opportunities, and even us as ordinary South Africans to also delve into the insights as to how we engage with business. When it comes to the year ahead, 2019, politics is certainly front of the agenda, as I observe your socks. Secondly, we also need to understand the business dynamics. I understand, and understanding the business dynamics that we need to be quite cognizant of. But in your view, the year 2019 ahead, what are the key elements that business leaders need to be mindful of?
I think you need to be mindful of the fact that it's going to be chaotic, that you will be able to predict nothing, that you will be able to forecast nothing, and that you're going to have to simply do what you do and do it very well. Let's take me back 12 months. What were we in this time? It was a Ramaphoria. And then it was great. So the first quarter of last year was Ramaphoria. And then we got to the second quarter and it was Rama reality. And then we got to the quarter three. It was Rama what the... It was like, it's not working anymore. And then we got to the fourth quarter and it was like, Rama, okay, it's kind of business as usual. The reality of South Africa and the reality of this continent and the reality of the world in which we live is that it is very, very uncertain, that it is chaotic, it's very hard to plan. Jeremy Corbyn, for those of you who watch British politics, could be driving to Buckingham Palace tomorrow to be asked by the Queen to form a government if Theresa May's Brexit vote goes pear-shaped tonight at 9 o'clock. Or not. Donald Trump may or may not have a functioning state in a week or 2 or 10 from now and may be forced to feed McDonald's in future to his visitors as they come in because the state can't provide catering for visitors to the White House. The world is in a very chaotic state. We look through Asia, we look through Russia, for example, things are chaotic. Just last week, you could have got petrol in Zimbabwe for under 20 bucks a litre, now you're paying 45 bucks a litre and people are going mad, understandably. The DRC, there's an election outcome and suddenly nobody likes the election outcome because it wasn't predicted.
Yeah.
The world is increasingly less predictable. But you know what's amazing about people who succeed in chaotic environments is that they navigate the chaos and they thrive in chaos. And people who fail don't know how to navigate the chaos. So 2019 is certainly a year of careful navigation. It's a year of careful strategy. And it's a year of beginning to invest in a future that we can't see. And that takes an enormous amount of faith. But it takes an enormous amount of faith, just like the great business leaders of today expressed 20 and 30 years ago in a future they couldn't see.
Exactly.
So put on your big boy pants or your big girl pants If you're a big girl, you can put on big boy pants. I don't judge. If you're a boy, you can put on big girl pants. Nobody judges your pants.
Certainly.
But put on pants.
Put on pants and certainly create a future that we don't even know what it looks like at the same time. But I also want to get your views on the perceptions versus reality. Because so often, members like you and I in the media often get pointed out for perhaps being sensationalists and creating these headlines and causing panic for the slightest move that we might even see in the currency. How does the reality of what we report on a day-to-day basis actually translate into the livelihoods and the back pockets of ordinary South Africans?
Yeah, and it is a brutal reality. I mean, the thing is, we're in the business of creating content, not creating content. The content is created and we simply report on it.
Sure, and provide analysis.
And analyze it. And I think if you're stuck in the maelstrom of the day-to-day, it's very easy to lose perspective. And that's why what we need to do is simply get a helicopter view of what's happening in the world. In a place as chaotic and as difficult as South Africa, there's an extraordinary amount of really good stuff happening. I've got a new talk, it's called Rebels, Renegades, and Problem Solvers. If you want problems, this place is the best place in the world for problems. We have got big problems, and you know the best thing about problems is most of them can be solved fairly easily by careful application and smart people. You know what we have here? We have really smart people who do really careful and good application. Sure. I've got some great stories of people who thrive at the edge of chaos. People, the rebels, the renegades, the problem solvers, who in a unique South African environment, do you think Adrian Gore could have created vitality anywhere else in the world? Perhaps there are a couple of countries, but certainly vitality was a response to a small, well-heeled, aging, wealthy population that would have big medical claims in the future, and he simply didn't have the premiums to guarantee that he'd be able to pay those claims into the future. So what did he do? He made us all get fitter and healthier, eat better stuff, and go to the gym more often so that we wouldn't claim from him. And that's now in 30 countries across multiple health insurance companies. This environment creates great opportunities for smart people to capitalize on.
Smart people, opportunities that also exist in the market. Rutendo, that brings me to you because I do want to get your views.
The only smart person on the panel.
Play nice, Bruce. I warned you about Bruce.
Now I feel like I'm on 702.
You feel like you're on 702? I promise you, we won't grow you on this
Which is better than being on Kaya, actually. It's fine.
But award-winning business shows nonetheless. Rutendo, with that said, I do want to get your views on doing business on the African continent because as we know, two powerhouse economies, Nigeria and South Africa, seeing election years, facing ongoing economic and political pressures, but of course, opportunities do exist. But even in your own keynote, the rumble in the jungle, you create the example regarding Muhammad Ali and George Foreman that at some point you need to have a game plan to ensure that you can also conquer just like Ali. Are there some sweet spot examples and some key principles that leaders in the room who work across the continent need to be conscious of when it comes to doing business in Africa?
Good, Gugu, have definitely on point. And just picking up from Bruce, I think, with my experience, I've worked for over 20 years in Africa, probably 20 different countries. Whether it's a listed company on the London Stock Exchange or a small startup company, I have quite a good experience on it. And the reason I use the analogy of rumble in the jungle, George Foreman and Muhammad Ali, obviously Muhammad Ali won the fight in 9 rounds. But there were 5 key nuggets that I believe were fundamental in terms of a business being successful in Africa that you can glean from that fight and that I've put together also from PhD studies. Firstly, understand the territory. Muhammad Ali understood the environment. He won the crowns before the fight won. And for you to understand Africa, for you to understand the dynamics, for you to be successful as a business, you have to understand the very DNA, the culture of the people, of the societies. Secondly, you have to be innovative. You have to think out of the box. You gave an example of Adrian Gore with what they did with Vitality. You can't do the same things the same number of times in Africa and expect to get the same result. You have to be innovative. You have to think out of the box. The third thing that you learn from the fight is you have to grab opportunities. When those opportunities come before you grab them, there's the saying in African proverbs that a roaring lion kills no game. It doesn't matter how much you roar, how much noise you make, you eventually have to go for the jugular. You have to have that adrenaline to go for the kill. The fourth thing is identify the threats. And that's one thing Muhammad Ali did with George Foreman. He understood that George Foreman was the enemy. He had a big mouth, but even though he had a bigger mouth, he realized George Foreman was a true enemy. He was a threat, and he adapted his strategy for that. And with Africa, there are a lot of things that we call threats that you can't change. You can't change the president of South Africa. Well, in South Africa you can, but the problem doesn't go away. I'm from Zimbabwe, so please bear with me. It took us 40 years.
You can there too.
Takes a little bit longer.
You can't change the health problems, But at the end of the day, identify the threats and navigate your way through them. You've got 54 countries, 54 people groups, 54 heads of state, 54 challenges. Understand the challenges and navigate through them. And the fifth and most important point is have a relentless drive and determination. Because after the academics, after the econometrics, after the things that they say on paper goes, when you have to survive on the African soil as a business and persevere, if you want to be an MTN overcoming the billion-dollar problem, have the relentless drive and determination. That's what Muhammad Ali also had to beat George Foreman.
Let's talk about some of those examples, and perhaps if there are any practical lessons that we can share with many individuals here in the room. What made ShopRite work that didn't work so well for Telkom, that didn't work so well for Truwords, as well as the likes of Mr. Price when they went into markets north of our borders?
So I think it was a combination of factors. One, definitely in terms of, as I highlighted, understanding the territory. I look at my own experience, having worked for a listed company, it was Sage, and one of the markets we're targeting to grow into aggressively was Nigeria. And everybody, you looked at the economics, you looked at what the analysts were saying. In 2010, it was a haven of opportunity. And we threw everything into that market. We threw resources, we threw people. We're a multinational. We've been successful with our strategies in Australia, in Europe, in America. And for us, we've been successful in Southern Africa. Growing into the Nigerian market was a walk in the park. After millions of dollars in investments, in terms of events, in terms of market advertisements, you name it, people, resources, we were failing. And we're selling software that was retailing at $100 US. We discounted to $30 US. And we wondered why were we battling, until I did a trip up there, I mixed with our partners and found out that our product was being sold on the black market for $1 US that was negotiable. That's just an example. Reality check. Understand the territory. Your ShopRites have probably been successful because they understood the territory. They partnered right to the local guys. The guys who've been unsuccessful have been unlucky, but to a certain extent it's because of that, not understanding the territory and the local dynamics.
There's something quite critical that you mentioned there, which is when Nigeria was the market to go into, because all the economic indicators were in its favor, right? Of course, a growing population, youthful dynamics as well, and of course, better prospects for economic growth in that market. So as a leader, we consult with economists, you speak to strategists and many other individuals to say, where should I be investing? Yeah. And firstly, what do we look at? The numbers. Yeah, how do we need to interrogate the investment case then of regions to penetrate beyond just looking at the numbers and the facts and figures?
It's a valid point. It's a valid point, Gugu. I'm just using examples because it brings it home better. I mean, right now I'm working with a company that's based in the US, and they've developed a solution, a technology solution to harness solar power using NASA technology. So the technology that uses rockets, that takes rockets up to space. And he looked at Africa, and right now our population is 1.2 billion. If you look at statistics, 600 million people don't have electricity. That's a problem Eskom will never be able to solve. Any other country will not be able to solve that. But he looks at this solution and he looks at it and says, I've seen the statistics, but where's the opportunity? And through working with him, we found out that in countries like Rwanda, the government is harnessing that power and harnessing the opportunity and saying, we want people to come here, invest in the technology, and give us solutions so that people can have electricity in our homes. So I'm going back to the point that the statistics do show the reality on the ground, but you still need to come down on the ground, understand the dynamics, and invest. And there's huge opportunity, as Bruce has said. There is absolutely huge opportunity. Identify the problems in Africa. Therein lies the opportunity. And a lot of social capitalists are killing it in Africa because of that.
I mean, again, the M-Pesa story is a tired story, but again, that solution would not have been discovered anywhere else 100%. Other than a place like Kenya, which had a need for financial services. Exactly. It wasn't being provided by the mainstream industry, 100%. And some bright spark came up with a plan, yep. And it's solving the problem.
Individuals finding opportunities and, of course, solving the problem. And you've given us a quick overview of not only the politics and the policies that are involved, but you mentioned individuals, people, that came up. And that necessarily takes a lot of authentic leadership to come to the fore. But if you take a look at many indices from the Mo Ibrahim Institute to even the World Corruption Index, when it comes to doing business on the African continent and maybe even further afield, we don't fare too favorably when it comes to authentic leadership, not only in the public sector, but that's also been highlighted more recently within the private sector as well. Kate, I want us to come to you on that particular segment, because for any of these individuals to find opportunity, to empower themselves with the right workforce, they need to have specific characteristics that speak to authentic leadership. What is it and how do we achieve it?
So I think at the outset, authentic leadership is not synonymous to, or a lack of it is not synonymous to a developed or developing country. I think there's examples locally and globally that kind of shows the lack of it. But if you look at the characteristics specifically, it's around actually being true to yourself and actually finding your moral rudder. And I think South Africa has great examples where we've shown a lack of authentic leadership, and that's had a direct impact on our economy, which is going to take us years to recover. But it's leading from the principles of what I call intrinsic values versus extrinsic. And when I refer to extrinsic, it's not from positions of power, it's not from material gain, it's really from the intrinsic values of what is the social benefit and what is for the greater good of our country. And I always think of a wonderful example. It's about understanding your narrative, your crucibles and your failures as a leader in order to be an authentic leader. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Howard Schultz, who bought Starbucks at its infancy, the reason he started this business simply was around the basis of the fact that his dad was actually in an accident and as a result left their family completely destitute because the company that he had worked for did not provide medical benefits. And when he set out on his journey of building this business of Starbucks, he was very clear about his narrative and what actually caused the impact, or what was the impact on his family. And when he set out on the journey of developing Starbucks, he made sure that he brought those benefits in. So I think as leaders, in order to be authentic, you need to understand your narrative. You need to understand what has influenced you to make the decisions that you have. A wonderful example as well, Raja Gupta, right? Ex-MD of McKinsey. When the time he had
which Gupta was this?
Luckily, it wasn't a local one.
But he was at McKinsey.
Yeah, he was. He was the,
You
he
ticking
was
all the
the
boxes.
MD of McKinsey, right? At the time he had committed insider trading, he was worth $100 million.
And he committed insider
And he
trading.
committed insider trading. So
Yeah.
you wonder, why on earth would a person do this? But when you delve into his story and you understand his narrative, he had lost his parents at the age of 16. He became solely responsible for the individuals in his family, and he just felt being worth $100 million was just not sufficient.
Sure.
So it's important to understand, as in organizations, it becomes incredibly important to understand what is the narrative of all your leaders in that specific space, because they lead from that particular point. And the concept or the conversation around authentic leadership is incredibly important, especially now.
Bruce has a question for you.
Yes,
I'll be
Bruce.
polite enough to let him ask it.
Why is it that Exclusive Books has 600 titles on its shelves and in its storerooms to do with leadership, and only 30 to do with sex? I mean, we nothing.
Clearly, we're not having enough sex.
Or we think we don't need the books. But here's the problem with leadership. Never before has there been more information, more literature, more guidance, more coaching, more
But
teaching.
yet there's still a deficit.
There you
And
go.
yet
Exactly
it
that.
feels like it's never been worse.
Exactly. It's a time of need. We need it. We need to understand leadership. We need to understand that ethical values play a very big part of our organizations. And it's not something that can be ticked off in a box terms of corporate governance. I mean, if we go into the Steinhoff conversations as well, it really is, yes, corporate governance was there. Why did it not stop the things from happening?
Yes.
It was because there was just too much of lateral power given to certain individuals, and this whole concept of ethical leadership just seemed to have kind of distilled. It just sort of filtered out completely. It's the whole institutional compliance is actually diminished, and transactional leadership is actually increased.
What's quite clear that you've both highlighted here is that whilst we might have the legislation in place and, of course,
Correct.
the literature in place for us to actually understand what ethical leadership is, but, of course, when it comes to implementation, that's where the challenge comes in. Judging by the example that you made of Mr. Gupta from McKinsey,
Yes.
it seems as though that there's internal personality issues or perhaps cultural dynamics that also play an influence into one's value system and belief system and how
Correct.
that translates into how they operate in the business world.
Correct.
Is there a way in which we can find some kind of alignment between those two, where your values within your personal space actually speak to your values in the business space?
Definitely. I think it was mentioned earlier by one of the other speakers where they said that in an organization, generally what happens is that if the individual's personal values don't align with the company's values, it kind of works into a natural attrition that you move out of that space. But it becomes incredibly important that we hold each other accountable within that space. And I want to share with you a very simple example. There was a guy that posted something on LinkedIn the other day. And he said he went to the airport and he actually picked up his girlfriend and he had offloaded her luggage into his car. And he had the choice of either taking the trolley and pushing it into the next parking bay, which we all do typically, right? If you're going shopping, it's the easiest. Okay. Oh, is it just me? Come on, Bruce. And at that point, he made a mental choice to kind of take a few steps further and do the right thing and put it in the right place. And I think as South Africans, in every single context, we've got to make sure that we kind of hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard from an ethical perspective. Do you pay the bribe or don't you pay the bribe? And it starts off with every single person that's in the room and also outside of this room.
Exactly. Vumile, you've been quiet for way too long. I have to rope you into this conversation. Building up on ethical leadership, on individuals that you employ. You obviously work quite a lot with individuals within the workforce to bring out their full potential with a strong focus on millennials as well as women within employment. What are the dynamics that you are seeing with regard to ensuring that the values of an individual speak to good corporate governance and, of course, empower the workforce to not only increase productivity, but also see this level of authentic leadership coming through in the pipeline?
I think there's been such a deficit, specifically in South Africa and actually in the continent, with regards to being authentic and holding true to our values. And with the millennials, and I know everyone's so tired, millennium mania, we're so over it, we've got a new problem. Centennials. Congratulations. The under 24s are joining the workforce.
Under 24.
Known as centennials. So what we're finding is millennials are more interested in the purpose. Why does this exist? I'll use myself as an example. I joined a telecommunications company not because they sold cell phones. I joined them because they told me an anecdote about how they were bringing malaria drugs into Tanzania just in time. So all of a sudden, I wasn't selling airtime. I was selling hope. That is the difference. I felt a sense of purpose. Whilst our centennials are your hashtag fees must fall. Hashtag me too. Hashtag we all need a cause. Those are centennials. They're now starting to drag us to a point where what used to be acceptable as leadership is now citizens being active, saying no, even if it is just digital most of the time at the moment. This is no longer okay. No, you can't steal. Because they've seen the ramifications of just pure capitalism without a conscience.
Sure. But how do we find an alignment between all these philosophies and views? Because you've got baby boomers still in the environment, multiple generations, and of course intercultural interactions taking place. Are we seeing that does still align to authentic leadership, profitability, partnerships on the African continent, and sourcing those solutions to address challenges in the business environment?
I think there's a big pull and tug where traditionally in corporates, and this is what I find when I go into the workplace, we'll say collaboration is one of our values. That's what we believe in. Oh, we've got people with experience. We've got people who are going to bring us bright new ideas, but the culture is actually not conducive to it. So it's no longer just about the values being something that you plaster on the wall. And we're seeing some organizations driving stuff like innovation, and I'll use my former employer, FNB, for this example, where they had a young gentleman who was so frustrated with constantly losing his cards after having a nice night out, that he said, imagine if I just didn't need a card. All I needed was my cell phone. Boom. E-wallet was created. Using the experience of people who've been in the organization a little bit longer, but being able to truly collaborate. That has to happen from a values perspective, it has to happen from a leadership perspective, and it really does also have to happen from a partnership perspective.
Rutendo did touch on the partnership. You want to build up on that briefly?
Well, I just wanted to add in terms of, I'd like to state categorically that I am a millennial, although I don't look it. Okay, moving on.
Consultants.
But, in terms of, addressing the problem at hand and the motivation for corporates, just picking up from what you said, the point I wanted to highlight was a research done, I think it was research to do with the Innovation Index globally in terms of what are the most innovative trends that are happening globally. It was done by PwC, as much as it pains for me to say it because I'm from Deloitte, I have to say it. But it highlighted globally that the leading areas of innovation in the world is going to be in food production. And you ask yourself, but why? But then you realize if the population of the world is going to grow, people are going to have to do the most basic thing, is eat. We're going to produce more food efficiently, raise animals more efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the point that it highlights is that when we look at our problems globally, even from an African perspective, if you identify the problems and you say, what is the thing that solves this? What is the most innovative way to solve this and address that? That in itself will make a huge impact. And the most successful people that you look the things that they've addressed, like she highlighted, identified a problem, provided a solution for necessity. is the mother of invention.
Exactly. In keeping with that theme of executives who are perhaps based here but have operations in multiple jurisdictions, what I do also want to gauge is that empowerment of the workforce. And Vumile, this is clearly your area of expertise here too, where some academics, they thrive, but perhaps in the practicalities of sourcing some solutions, that's where they tend to struggle. Are we seeing particular dynamics that executives need to be aware of when it comes to having a workforce that either has all the skills and the creativity that's needed, offsetting that against academics?
I feel that a lot of our smaller to medium-sized enterprises are integrating quite well. I think our large organizations tend to be a little bit slower in execution. The biggest challenge is we are a little bit out of touch with reality as large organizations. And I say that because we're not realizing this. We live in Africa. In the next 6,000 days, we will have the largest population in the world. More than China, more than India. Meaning, are we actually ready as organizations to bring these people in? What skill sets are we going to empower them with? Are we realizing that our people are our greatest assets? We say it in theory. It sounds so nice in theory. But what sort of cultures are we creating to be conducive to this disruption, to allow these sort of things to happen? And I think from a person who does work in Nigeria and who does work in South Africa, you can see where things are a little bit hierarchical, where things are a little bit, we've always done it this way, and where people are a little bit more fluid and saying, actually, let's change, let's evolve, let's be disruptive.
Exactly. Well, we've given you so much to think about, and I think for any executive who's sitting out there, they must be so frustrated because their mind is convoluted with all these themes about understanding the politics and the policies of the day, how that does translate into people, having the right leaders at the top who are ethical and, of course, manage processes accordingly, and, of course, a workforce which is motivated and productive, and then, most importantly, ensuring that this translates into profit at the end of the day. So to each of you, I want to leave you with, or provide us with your closing remarks. All of you have the opportunity to walk into boardrooms, to speak on platforms like this at conferences for business executives who need to bear in mind politics, people, and profit. These 3 Ps that they need to ensure are adhered to at all times. How do they need to adapt to that for 2019? Bruce, your closing remarks.
It's all about the people. It's all about the people you choose to employ and those you choose to exclude. It's about being inclusive in the South African and the Pan-African workplace. It's about harvesting the very best ideas and not being scared to throw out the rubbish. For leaders to use their experience, for leaders to also understand the context in which they operate, that it is a complex context, it is a difficult context, but also to know that this environment has delivered more wealth to more people in the last 30 years than anywhere else on this African continent, and certainly in many other parts of the world. And politicians aren't going to solve the problems. Politicians may even create obstacles. But if you can navigate politics, politicians, and obstacles, then people profit. What was the other one?
People profit and policies.
And no, that wasn't it. But anyway, the other one
It was.
will follow.
You sound like you're quite optimistic. I want to pick your brain very briefly. Last year you mentioned that we had Ramaphoria, Rama, ooh, what you doing, and some Rama something else. Where are we now? Rama?
We're in Rama rumbling along, I think. I've run out of Rama.
You run out of
but it's everybody's waiting for this election. It's going to happen, I think, on the 8th of May, simply because there are lots of public holidays and there's lots of TV time, and then you want to strike while your PR is hot. So I suspect the 8th of May we will have a general election. I suspect that Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC will be victorious. And people then expect Cyril Ramaphosa to grasp the reins of power and then to stamp his authority on the African National Congress and therefore then guide this country. Probably not. That's the reality. We're going to South Africa will muddle along politically and from a policy perspective. Those who succeed here will be those who can navigate the noise and those who can turn down the noise as much as possible and focus on what they're good at and focus on fixing problems. Problem solvers are in a sweet spot.
Sweet spot. Kate, you have the opportunity to speak to an audience.
So I think 2019 for me, I'm very optimistic about it. Sorry, Bruce. I'm an
an
absolute
optimist.
fan.
He's wearing South African socks, but we'll get into that later.
If we could lock up all politicians, we'd be fine.
We've got 2 minutes left.
So
Kate.
I'm a big fan of Cyril. If you had to ask me to choose who's worse off, US is in serious trouble.
So you'd say Ramaphosa is an authentic leader?
I do think so. I think he's just more systematic in his approach. He might not give us the answers immediately, but I mean, guys, come on, we've had Zuma for for a couple of years, and now it's in the right direction. So in saying that, I think we are in for some interesting times, but I'm extremely, extremely positive about it. If I look at it from a globalization perspective on leadership, I think it's incredibly important if you're playing in emerging markets or any other market, it's important that you kind of understand the geopolitical savviness. You know, you really have to understand the impact of Brexit. You've got to understand the US-China issue. You've got to even understand if the data center in India goes down and what does it impact on the research center in Shanghai. So you've got to be able to kind of get that understanding in terms of your leaders. It's incredibly important to not go into these markets with your own cultural biases. You know, sometimes when we go into, be it Nigeria or into Kenya, we kind of assume that our way of doing business is going to be the answer in those markets. And to be a truly global leader, you need global intelligence. And that requires the ability to sort of self-regulate, be aware of your biases, and operate in a space that's creating an opportunity and addressing what they were referring to earlier on was looking for a need that addresses a problem.
And we've used all the time. It's so cool. They've got
Sorry,
no time.
they have indeed. But Rutendo and Vumi, you still have your brief 30 seconds to give us your closing remarks.
My advice for any company wanting to expand on the African continent, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Egypt, Kenya, or Nigeria, is when you look at your president or the leader of that country, whatever position, whether it's good or bad, see him as the CEO. And when you approach him as a CEO, one of the old lessons I learned from when I was selling software solutions, and I believe I was actually quite good, although I've got no track record. One of the good things that I learned is that you always scratch where it itches. When you've got a decision maker, look at him and pitch a solution that addresses his needs, whether it's a director or a financial director. And so many instances we forget this, and the Chinese are actually very good at this. They come into Africa, they go to a prime minister and they say, what is your problem? I need roads, they build roads. Whether mediocre roads, whatever, they get it done. And sometimes we get confused with the economics and the politics and avert to that. So my advice is look at the leader of any country as a CEO, see how you address the needs, obviously in a responsible and a capable manner, and in that you'll probably be more successful than what you're doing now.
Perfect. I'll keep mine very, very short and succinct.
Mine was short.
The lies you tell. For me, it's the people are our assets, right? That's the truth. Africa has never been wealthier. What is your organization doing to caretake its greatest assets?
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Of course, understanding those three Ps, politics, people, and profit. Thank you so much for joining us. Profit was the one you were looking for.
Silly me.
At the end of the day, that's what it's about. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.